going to cover a limited series comic that came out in the last year known as Unnatural Order, released by a publishing company known as Vault Comics. I wanted to go a bit into what the comic book entails, as well as the story behind the scenes at Vault Comics and how this publishing company got founded.
Vault Comics.
Vault Comics is an independent publisher founded in 2016 by Adrian and Damian Wassel, brothers who spent a lot of times at comic book conventions in their early years, and so they learned the trade by being around a lot of the people who are making these books for a long time. Their publishing company mainly focuses on genre-based storytelling, so that means that they are mainly using the genre to propel the story forward. And what that would look like, per se, is unlike perhaps a Star Wars Acolyte, something that people are happy to be mad about these days. That isn't really a sci-fi story, or at least it no longer is from what I understand. I haven't watched it for myself, so I can't entirely speak to it, but from what I understand, it's not really a sci-fi story anymore. And the only things that make it sci-fi are the fact that there are laser guns and lightsabers and spaceships. But outside of that, it doesn't stick true to the genre. And so these books that the Wassels are publishing, they are mainly intended to speak true to the genre. And I think the book that I'm covering today, Unnatural Order, although it's a big mishmash of different genres, it really does do well to actually stick true to that genre and bring forward some of the elements that you would traditionally see in those types of stories. Lastly, where I got a lot of my information on Vault Comics was from the Vault Comics podcast. I'm forgetting on the name, it'll appear on the screen, but episodes 7, 8, and 9 are with the founders of Vault Comics. 7 and 9 are with Adrian and then Damian, and then the 8 is with another gentleman who they founded the company with, whose name I'm forgetting, and will also appear on the screen. But basically, I went and watched the hour and 40 minutes of this content, give or take, and got a good understanding of exactly how they founded the company, their operations, how it is they produce comic books, and in general, even if you're not looking to research this company, if you're a creator who's looking to make comic books, these are really informative videos that are worth viewing. Unnatural Order by Christopher Yost and Val Rodrigues. So this is a 4-issue limited series written by Christopher Yost. The first time I got introduced to his writing was on the Superior Spider-Man team-up book back in 2015, I believe. That's when Dr. Octopus switched minds with Peter Parker, and the team-up book mainly explores how Spider-Man is interacting with all these other heroes he knows and how they are all noticing that there's definitely a shift in Spider-Man's behavior. And so throughout that book, he does a pretty good job of writing Spider-Man. I've talked about Spider-Man in the past and my thoughts on him, and it's that I'm incredibly biased. He's my favorite comic book hero, so doesn't mean I think Christopher Yost did a bad job, but you're not going to do the best job ever. Nobody really will, unfortunately. That's the hard thing about writing Spider-Man for any writer. You're working with a bunch of unruly fans. But aside from that, seeing his name on the book really drew my attention to it. I picked it up without seeing his name, but once I saw his name, I was like, oh, well, I know of this guy, so it's at least perhaps picking up the first issue to see exactly where this is going to go. And after picking it up, I was interested in continuing to read. Another thing to note is that the cover on the first book was really good. I not only liked the image a lot, but the stylization by the artist Val Rodrigues was really good, and it certainly was the first thing that drew me to the book, as is often the case with comic books. One last interesting note about this book speaks more to the publishing company, Vault Comics. With this book, what they did on the first issue is they gave the issues to retailers for free so long as they ordered a minimum number of copies. I believe the minimum number being 25. And so if you were a comic book store and you ordered 25 comics, you would get them for free from Vault Comics. As a result, this inflated the sales of the first issue because comic book stores had more number one issues than any other of the issues that were released, and that's simply because they ordered more of them because they're free. It's a literally they got 25 books for free at the minimum, 25 books for free, and then they could sell them for what I believe is $5. And so 25 times 5, that's 125. It's 125 free bucks. That's, great business decision no matter who you are. And that's only if they got the 25. So mainly to speak to this, I think it's a really cool marketing strategy and a really great way to promote a book. But that being said, the sales of the first issue were heavily inflated due to this, and that's simply because more stores picked up more books and they spent more time on the shelves. And after a long period of time, people just eventually picked the book up. That doesn't mean that they had consistent readers who actually read the entire series, like myself. And so it's just simply something interesting to note. It might be something that I think they're going to try and do with future books that they're releasing, that is Vault. But it's interesting simply in that this could potentially be a new way for comic book companies to kind of promote their works, and not only promote them, but a good way of actually getting some feedback on the book. As far as like if you're to give it to the stores for free, they will give you much more honest feedback as to what's going on with the book probably, versus if you're nickel and diming the stores, it's going to be a controversial or a combative relationship that you have with that retailer. The story. Unnatural Order is billed as a sci-fi... Unnatural Order is billed as a dark fantasy sci-fi action-adventure book, which is just a mouthful for a genre. But the story opens up with a kind of mystery in that we're following a bunch of heroes in what seems to be the past, and we get to see a glimpse of our villain. And while there's some fictional elements like magic in there, it seems as though this is very true to our history in the real world. But it's not until the end of the issue that we see our heroes rescuing somebody, Murphy, from the burning fields. And when we get a glimpse of who this person is, it's a guy from the modern day era dressed in modern day soldiers' clothing. And so the second issue picks up with that story as how Murphy got to be in that spot. He's also referred to as Murtaugh some in the story, and I think that's just supposed to be like in this new world, he's Murtaugh, whereas in the old world, he's Murphy. Just an interesting little writing element in there. So he's in our time, he was sent on a mission to stop a terrorist at the CERN Super Collider facility. And in that time, we also see that he kind of is on the phone, listening to somebody telling somebody he's going to be home as soon as he can, kind of thing. And then he goes and leads to the mission. They get to CERN. Everything goes tits up. Lots of his men die. He makes it into the facility, and he finds this gentleman, Yost, who's referred to as a terrorist in his time, but he's actually a druid who's kind of been alive for seemingly forever, like an immortal man, and he's harnessing the power of the Super Collider to remake the world. And then the story that we're seeing in the first issue where these people rescue Murphy, that's the remade world that Yost made. So this is kind of backstory for number one. Now, in the rest of the story, Murphy's trying to convince this group of people who are a berserker named Gunther, a witch named Adrian, a Roman named Octavius, a thief named Caden, and a warrior named Igdid. It's spelt a bit weird, E-A-G-D-Y-D, or E-A-D-G-Y-D, just Edgid, maybe. They're brought together by loss, and that is that Yost killed all their villages, families, so on and so forth, and now they're just seeking revenge on him. They don't really trust Murphy because he keeps telling them like everything around them isn't real. This is another world, and for them, this is all they know. So he's kind of just a sore thumb, honestly. The group eventually travels back to the CERN facility. In that time, too, we get to see a giant dragon, which is pretty cool, really well drawn, and it's a good fantasy element that we see in there that I really like. Eventually, they fight the dragon, and they're able to pass through this sort of barrier, energy field, more like it, that's surrounding the CERN facility. And once they pass through the energy field, on the inside of the energy field, everything looks like it does before the world was changed. And so there's planes, there's some cars there, and the CERN facility still looks the exact same. And all the people who pass through, aside from Murphy, they revert back to the versions of who they were before the world was changed. And so rather than it being Octavius the Roman, it's this guy in a suit who looks like he was a stock trader or day trader in our world. And so all of our characters are very confused. They start remembering things, but they're pushed out of the field by this other godly force who we end up learning is the doctor who helped assist Yodak in using the CERN super collider, Dr. Kinzinger. Eventually Murphy, Octavius, and Edgid are able to make it back through the energy field. The others don't want to go through, and they actually think that the world they're living in now is the right way, and they want to do whatever they can to keep it that way. Once Murphy and the others get inside the CERN facility, they find Yodak, and he's just playing Xbox and chilling. It's one of the funniest things. You got this guy who's a god in this world, and all he wants to do is be a complete lazy bum. It's really just funny, and perhaps speaks to Christopher Yost's desires. I don't know entirely though. But they make it in there, and even though he has this godly level, it doesn't stop him from getting a bullet to the brain. And before that happens, we get kind of Yodak's backstory, which it's that he, was attacked by the Romans long ago, and then it follows him through history. He eventually lost favor with his gods, and he worshipped a sort of sun god, and he then started sacrificing people to the gods so as he could gain more power. And eventually, when he saw the nuclear bombs drop, he realized that that was the power of the gods, that the humans had created it. And he worked hard to get it for himself, and eventually did so with the super collider. And he used it to reset the world. That's when that godly force which pushed him out of the energy field, Dr. Kinzinger, she shows up, and she says that actually it wasn't just Yodak doing this, that she has a hand to play in this, and that she's been maintaining the world too. And that's because she thinks, and this is some baloney, but she thinks this dark fantasy sci-fi world is better than the world which we live in, our real world, and that's due to things like climate change. And us humans, we're just terrible people destroying the world, as always.
Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague.
And so we also learn in this time that Murphy, he was talking to somebody on the phone in one of the first issues about coming home to see them, and that was his wife, who's pregnant with his unborn child. Well, we learn actually that his wife and unborn child died long before the event of Yodak changing the world. In fact, they died when he went on a previous mission. He was, supposed to be there for he thinks he was supposed to be there for his wife. It sounds like an accident happened. He wanted to be there. She died along with his unborn child. And while all this stuff is taking place at the CERN facility, Yodak is kind of telling Murphy, like, hey, I can bring her back. And so now you have these competing things, and then there's the Edgid woman who made it through the portal with him, and she is so heavily affected by what she used to live, the previous life she used to live. She was a maternity ward worker, and the idea of all those babies being blinked out of existence has just really thrown her for a loop. And so she just wants so bad for the world to go back how it was. So she wants it to go back to how it was. Murphy wants this new sort of thing where his wife and unborn child can come back to life. And then the doctor, she wants to kind of make a new hybrid of everything so as to make the world more aligned with the natural order of things. And Yodak just wants to sit in the CERN facility and play video games and just to let things go as they are. And so there's all these competing visions, and eventually Edgid, she shoots Yodak in the head, and everything just begins to collapse around them. Like the whole world just can't sustain itself without Yodak sustaining it. And so everything begins to collapse. Murphy tries to save Yodak so that he can kind of take control of the situation, but everything just flashes out of existence. And the last bit we get is Murphy. is walking through a sort of wasteland away from the CERN facility with a tied up Yodak who he is holding prisoner, and he is noting that everybody's going to be searching for him, but he just wants to get back what was his. So I loved these books, honestly. The story was really great. It was a super fun idea, and the dialogue was really good throughout this book, and ironically, none of it feels unnatural. But it reminds me of a mixture. The art reminds me of a mixture of Greg Capullo and Sarah Pacelli's work. That is Val Rodrigues' art. There's definitely like a blocky framing under a lot of the characters, much like Greg Capullo's artwork, if you've ever seen that. But then the lines are all very thin and stylized, much like Sarah Pacelli's work, and I don't know, it gives it a really clean finish. It's really nice. As I've already said, though, the only problem I kind of have was just that climate change bit, which was added in, which literally like a panel or two, maybe, of this Kinzinger, Dr. Kinzinger. She's going on about all the baloney, and that's fine. It was just a little bit of annoying to see, you know, I have commented on this before, but I think that that climate change being used as a plot device is not only lazy, but also just unreasonable, meaning they haven't really thought it through very well. Aside from that, I liked a lot of this stuff. The character development was great. We got a great understanding of kind of who every character was, what they were about, their motivations to some degree, and certainly while there were, you know, plot twists here and there, it really, like, they were true to who they were throughout the entire story. And not only that, we got a lot of good story within that as far as who everybody was, and we really got to see these different characters clash in a very genuine way, I think. So that was really nice. The only person we didn't really get tons of story on was Dr. Kinzinger, but I imagine we're going to see more of her in the second volume, which I only kind of realized there would be a second volume to this recently, and that's because 4 days ago, as far as filming this video goes, the trade paperback for the first volume was released, and that's when it kind of dawned on me, like, oh, volume 1, there will be a volume 2. But that being said, I haven't seen any news on volume 2. I haven't seen any news of them releasing another issue of this story, so, you know, that's just TBD. But it's certainly set up for a follow-up. Like, I was talking a bit about Yodak's backstory, and his backstory starts with a sort of like, there's a lot before going on, it seems. And instead it starts with what seems like the world had already been reset when his backstory starts. So it seems there's a story taking place before all of this too, which would be very interesting to uncover. So that's about it for Unnatural Order. I have some more thoughts on Vault Comics, though I kind of want to sit with them for longer, do a bit more research, and I'm actually going to try and reach out to somebody at Vault Comics so as to ask a few questions about things. Aside from that, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll check back in for more. Later this week, I got a bunch of comics that I'm going to be picking up, including Redcoat #3 and Rook Exodus #3, two of which I'm really excited about and really excited to share with everyone else. So once again, thanks for checking in.